Money is not math. It never was. It's not just numbers in a ledger or figures on a spreadsheet. You can master compound interest, learn every investment strategy, and still feel lost in the world of wealth. Because money begins long before the paycheck, long before the budget. It begins in the shadows of your beliefs. Every dollar you touch carries a memory, a voice, a story. And whether you realize it or not, you're spending your past just as much as your income. Your financial habits weren't built in a classroom. They were shaped at the dinner table, in your childhood home, in the silence between bills being paid or ignored, in the tension of watching your parents argue over not having enough, or in the quiet burden of knowing they worked hard and still fell short. You didn't just inherit your genetics. You inherited their relationship with money. And until you make that relationship conscious, it will run you. It will make decisions when you're tired, when you're afraid, when you're angry. It will whisper lies in your ear like you're falling behind, or they have more than you, or you're not successful unless you have what they have. And just like that, your life becomes a performance, a race with no finish line, a climb up someone else's mountain. But what if that noise isn't truth? What if it's just programming? What if wealth has nothing to do with how much you make and everything to do with how clearly you see? You see, you can earn like a king and live like a prisoner, because money doesn't change your mindset, it reveals it. If you're insecure, you'll use it to shout. If you're afraid, you'll use it to hide. If you're empty, you'll use it to try and feel full. But money isn't medicine. It can't heal a fractured identity. It can't fix what you've never faced. It can't buy clarity. It can only magnify confusion. And that's why so many people chase more and still feel less. Because more things don't fill emotional holes. More income doesn't quiet the voice inside that says you're not enough. If anything, it gets louder, and you spend faster, and you stretch further, and you smile wider in public while shrinking in private. This is how the world teaches you to live. Perform, compare, consume. But what if you chose something different? What if wealth was never meant to be loud? What if it was supposed to be quiet? Like contentment, like peace. Like a life that no longer needs to be explained. Because here's the truth most won't tell you. Real wealth is invisible. It's in the mornings that don't start with panic. In the relationships that aren't strained by financial pressure. In the freedom to say no without fear. In the way you sleep at night, unburdened by guilt, untethered from performance. It's not just what you earn, it's what you get to walk away from. It's not what you wear, it's how lightly you carry yourself. It's not what you own, it's what no longer owns you. But to live this way, you need a new definition of success. One that isn't based on impressing people who don't know your heart. One that's rooted in intention, not image. And to get there, you need to pause, to breathe, to look at your financial life and ask one question. Is this aligned with who I want to become? Because if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter how much you make, it's already costing you too much. There's a moment in every person's life when they stop and ask, what am I really working for? Not what you were told to want, not what society says success should look like, but you, raw, honest, stripped of noise, what do you actually want? That question is dangerous. Because when you ask it sincerely, you begin to see how many of your financial choices were made out of fear, out of habit, out of the desperate need to be enough in a world that profits from your insecurity. Look around. You'll find people who earn 6 figures and still can't sleep at night. People who drive luxury cars but cry on the way to jobs they hate. People who upgraded everything except their peace. And you'll find others quiet, calm, almost invisible. They don't look rich, but they walk differently. They move without rush. They make decisions with clarity. They live with options. And that's what wealth really buys, options. Options to stay or leave, to rest or run, to say yes only when your soul agrees. But most people aren't living in that kind of freedom. They're living under the weight of image, performing, pretending, surviving. And that's because somewhere along the way, they started confusing abundance with appearance. We were never taught to build wealth. We were taught to mimic it. We were shown the symbols, but not the structure, told to dress the part, but never taught how to think the part. We saw the polished lives, not the debt underneath. We watched the highlight reels, not the quiet panic behind the scenes. So we chased the car, the house, the brand, the lifestyle. And every time we upgrade to look like success, we move a step further from living it. Because success, real success, is never a performance. It's a feeling, a state of being. And it begins the moment you realize, I no longer need to earn my worth. You don't owe the world proof. You owe yourself peace. But peace takes practice. It takes saying no to things that would impress others but stress you. It takes holding the line when everyone around you is sprinting toward burnout. It takes redefining what winning even means. Ask yourself, what if success isn't more? What if it's enough? What if enough isn't small or mediocre or lazy, but sacred? What if enough is the threshold where stress ends and freedom begins? Because more is a treadmill. It never stops, it never rests, it always whispers, not yet. Keep going, keep spending, keep comparing. But enough is a choice, a sacred boundary. It's the point where you look at your life and say, I've got room to breathe, I've got time to feel, I've got space to live. And that space, that's where wealth lives. Because wealth is never the size of your bank account. It's the size of your life after stress is subtracted. It's what's left when fear is gone. It's what you get to keep when the pressure fades. And to reach it, you don't need to make more money. You need to make fewer compromises. You need to stop trading your values for validation, your rest for recognition, your truth for someone else's version of success. You were not born to compete. You were born to create, freely, fully, and without apology. And every time you spend in alignment with that truth, you're not just managing money, you're reclaiming power. You see, most people never pause long enough to realize they're not spending money, they're spending identity. Every swipe of the card says something. Every purchase carries a belief. I need this to feel confident. I deserve this because I'm tired. I want them to see me as successful. And without even knowing it, you start building a life that isn't based on who you are, but on who you're afraid not to be. But that's not wealth. That's survival dressed as success. Wealth is when your values and your actions shake hands. When your bank account reflects your inner peace, not your inner panic. When your spending habits say, I'm already enough. Because here's the reality. We don't live in a money-driven culture. We live in a validation-driven one. Money is just the tool we use to chase a feeling we haven't figured out how to give ourselves. So we spend to be seen, we spend to be liked, we spend to avoid the silence of sitting with ourselves. And the economy loves that, because the longer you feel inadequate, the more profitable you become. But what if you stopped? What if you looked at your life and said, no more performing, no more proving, no more spending for approval? What if you began to invest in something the world doesn't teach you how to value? Peace. Peace doesn't shout. It doesn't need a new outfit. It doesn't show up on social media. Peace is in the slow moments, in the decisions you don't regret, and the margin you create to breathe instead of chase. And peace isn't passive, it's earned. You earn it by choosing not to compete in games that cost you your sanity. You earn it by recognizing that comparison is a trap and freedom is the exit. You earn it by learning to say, I don't need to win by their rules. I'm building a different game. That's wealth. the ability to make choices from a place of vision, not reaction. To say no, not out of scarcity, but out of strength. To not need to upgrade your life, to feel like your life matters. And let's be honest, the world doesn't celebrate that. It won't clap for restraint. It won't like your simplicity, but your soul will, because your soul is tired of the noise, the constant rush, the grind that leaves you full of things and empty of purpose. Your soul doesn't want more stuff, it wants more space. Space to be present, to hear yourself, to remember what actually matters. That's the shift. That's where wealth begins, not with more income, but with fewer illusions. Because what if the real poverty is not lack of money, but lack of clarity? What if the most expensive thing in your life is everything you said yes to out of fear? Fear of being judged, fear of falling behind, fear of being forgotten. But clarity silences that fear. It reminds you that your value isn't in what you show, it's in what you know. And what you know, deep down, is that you were never here to compete. You were here to create a life that feels like home, not just on the outside, but on the inside. And every financial choice made from that place, that's not just a budget, that's a revolution. You don't need more, you need meaning. Because meaning makes everything lighter. It turns discipline into devotion, simplicity into serenity, sacrifice into sovereignty. Without meaning, even abundance becomes a burden. Look around. There are people with millions who still feel bankrupt. They can buy anything, yet they're owned by everything. Their calendars are packed, their closets overflowing, their homes immaculate, and still their hearts are restless. Because accumulation doesn't equal alignment. You can be rich in lifestyle and poor in joy. You can be surrounded by success and still starving for stillness. This is the great myth of wealth, that once you get there, the chaos will stop. But money doesn't calm chaos. It only amplifies what's already inside. If you're anxious now, more money just buys you more things to manage. If you're unfulfilled now, more success just raises the stakes of your performance. That's why the truly wealthy don't just ask, what can I afford? They ask, what can I afford to feel? Can I afford peace? Can I afford to slow down? Can I afford to rest in a world that tells me my worth is in my hustle? That's wealth. And to access it, you don't need to climb faster. You need to step back. To see your life not as a ladder, but a garden. Not as a race, but a rhythm. Because in a garden, growth doesn't come from pressure, it comes from patience. Your financial life is no different. Stop trying to force a harvest before you've tended the roots. Stop trying to earn your worth before you've defined it. Stop trying to keep up with people who aren't even going where you're meant to go. Instead, go inward. Tend to the soil. Ask the deeper questions. What does enough look like to me? What does a wealthy day feel like? Not in my wallet, but in my body. When was the last time I spent money that brought me peace instead of pressure? These are not budgeting questions, these are becoming questions. Because every dollar you spend is shaping your identity, your values, your future. So spend like someone who knows who they are. Save like someone who knows where they're going. And invest emotionally, spiritually, financially, like someone who knows what truly matters. Because the goal isn't just to be rich, the goal is to be rooted. To build a life that doesn't need applause to feel valuable. To create systems that don't collapse under stress. To reach the end of your month or your life and say, I lived aligned, I lived aware, I lived free. And that kind of wealth, it doesn't show up on a balance sheet. It shows up in your breath, in your relationships, in the ease you feel when you say no to things that no longer serve you. That's the power of clarity. That's the gift of intentional living. And that's the freedom most people are still chasing without realizing they already passed it by. The irony is, we spend our youth chasing money and our maturity trying to remember why. We were told it would fix things, that once the bills were easy, the tension would dissolve, that once we reached a certain level, we'd finally be enough. We'd rest, we'd slow down, we'd live. But here's the truth that hits hardest. Money doesn't change your nature, it just gives it volume. If you were anxious when you were broke, you'll be anxious with $1 million. If you didn't know how to say no before success, you'll say yes to even bigger things that steal your time, energy, and soul. That's why so many burn out at the peak, because they scaled the mountain but never asked if they were climbing the right one. They achieved but never healed. They earned but never defined enough. They reached the top, looked around, and realized the view wasn't worth the climb. You don't want that life. You want a life you don't need to escape from. You want mornings that don't begin with dread, days that don't blur into survival, evenings that aren't filled with the weight of overcommitment. In that life, it doesn't come from sudden success. It comes from steady alignment, from the little choices, the daily discipline, the internal shift from asking, how do I get more, to how do I make what I already have feel like enough? Because that's what no one teaches us. Enough is not a finish line, it's a mindset. And when you live from that mindset, everything changes. Your spending slows because you're not trying to impress anyone. Your savings grow because you're no longer trying to buy peace. Your energy rises because you're no longer negotiating your worth through your productivity. Suddenly you have margin. Margin for rest, for creativity, for noticing the beauty of a life you once overlooked, while chasing the next thing. And with that margin, you start to heal. Because you're no longer forcing your way through life. You're flowing, rooted, intentional. You're no longer competing. You're creating. You're no longer chasing validation. You're honoring your values. That's real success. Not the moment the money hits your account, but the moment you realize your worth was never tied to that number. Not the day you impress others, but the day you stop needing to. Not the lifestyle you build for the world, but the peace you build within yourself. And when you reach that point, you begin to live with quiet strength. Not because life got easier, but because you got clearer. You learned how to hold what matters and let go of what doesn't. You stopped asking, what can I get? And started asking, what do I want to feel? And in that space, in that calm, in that clarity, you began to remember who you really are. Most people don't realize it, but they're building their financial lives like sandcastles right at the edge of the tide. Beautiful from a distance, impressive to others, but one wave, one shift, one unexpected expense, and it's gone. Why? Because it wasn't built on clarity. It was built on appearance. We're told to focus on income, but not endurance, to increase lifestyle, but not stability, to expand constantly, but never pause to ask what happens if life doesn't go as planned. And life rarely goes as planned. Markets crash, jobs end, health decline, life interrupts. That's not failure, that's reality. And those who survive, those who thrive, aren't the ones who had the highest earnings. They're the ones who planned for imperfection, who left room for error, who didn't build their identity on fragile foundation. Because real wealth isn't about maximizing every opportunity. It's about minimizing unnecessary risk. It's not just about offense, it's about defense. It's about being wise enough to say, I don't need to push everything to the limit. I need space to breathe. But our culture doesn't praise breathing. It praises burnout. It idolizes the overachiever, the one who never stops, the one who scales endlessly. But scaling without soul isn't success. It's surrender. It's handing over your well-being in exchange for recognition. It's trading your peace for performance. And for what? So you can impress people who won't be at your funeral. So you can live in a house that's too big to feel like home, so you can keep running on a treadmill that never stops. There's another way. It's quieter, slower, but infinitely more sustainable. It begins with asking a radical question. What if I stopped trying to look successful and started trying to feel successful? What would change? Would you live in the same place? Drive the same car? Say yes to the same obligation? Would you still spend like your value depended on someone else's opinion? Or would you start listening to yourself? Because here's the secret. The wisest people aren't loud about their wealth. They're quiet about their peace. They're not trying to win arguments. They're not chasing followers. They're not flashing anything. Why? Because they already have what everyone else is still trying to buy, enough. They don't need more to feel full. They don't need to be seen to feel real. They know who they are and they protect that. They're not minimalists for style. They're minimalists for sanity. They don't live below their means because they're scared. They do it because they're free. And that freedom, it's not something you stumble into. It's something you choose every day, with every dollar, with every decision, with every time you say, I don't need to prove anything, because peace is more valuable than performance. Here's chunk 7 of 10 of your cinematic motivational voiceover script. Continuing with emotional clarity and grounded power, when you finally stop performing, you begin to live. You start to hear the quiet truths you've been drowning out with noise. Like the fact that most of your spending was never about need, it was about numbness. You weren't buying joy, you were buying distraction, buying escape, buying a feeling you didn't know how to create on your own. And it worked for a little while, until it didn't. Until the closet was full but your soul was empty. Until the trips got longer but your peace got shorter. Until you realized the lifestyle you built was costing you the life you want. This is where most people panic. They think the solution is to earn more, hustle harder, stretch further. But more of the same never heals the root. Because what you're really searching for isn't more income. It's more alignment. You want your life to feel like home. You want your days to make sense again. You want to wake up and not feel like you're sprinting through someone else's version of success. And that's possible, but not through a raise, not through a promotion, through redirection. You have to redefine what richness means to you, not according to influencers, not according to your neighbors, not according to your past. What does a rich life feel like? Does it look like waking up slow, not needing an alarm clock? Does it feel like taking your kid to school without rushing? Does it sound like laughter echoing through a small home filled with love and not debt? Those are the questions that rebuild your foundation. Because wealth isn't about quantity, it's about quality. Not how many things, but how deep your peace runs beneath them. It's about how quickly you can come back to center when the world tries to shake you. How calmly you can say no when everyone else says yes. How confidently you can walk away from noise. Because you've learned to listen to yourself. You don't need more income to get there. You need fewer leaks in your energy. Fewer things you say yes to just to be liked. Fewer subscriptions draining your time and soul. Fewer obligations that look good on paper but feel wrong in your gut. This is how you get rich. Not by chasing, by clearing. Clearing space, clearing noise, clearing all the false stories about what your life is supposed to look like. And in that clearing, you begin to feel wealthy. Not because you added anything, but because you finally let go. Let go of needing to be impressive. Let go of guilt around rest. Let go of proving you're worthy. Let go of racing people who aren't even going where you're meant to go. That's when the real riches show up. And they don't shout, they breathe, they ground, they whisper. This is what freedom feels like. You can't be wealthy if you're always afraid. Afraid of being left behind. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of what it means to stop chasing. Fear makes you spend what you don't have. Fear makes you say yes when your spirit says no. Fear makes you chase things that never had the power to fulfill you in the first place. But when you step out of fear, you step into freedom. And freedom doesn't begin with money. It begins with boundaries, not just financial ones, emotional ones, mental ones, the kind that protect your attention, your focus, your sense of self. Because your time, that's your most expensive currency. And every time you trade it for something that drains you, just because you feel obligated, you're becoming poorer. But the wealthiest people in the world, they guard their time. They don't fill their days to prove their worth. They filter their days to protect it. They know that every no they say to distraction is a yes to direction. They don't need to chase 100 opportunities. They only need one aligned one and the space to fully commit to it. And that's the wealth most people never touch, focused freedom. The kind that lets you go deep instead of wide. The kind that lets you choose quality over quantity in your money, in your work, in your life. But you can't access that version of wealth if you're still addicted to busyness. Busyness is the mask. Stillness is the mirror. When you slow down, the truth catches up. You start to realize that half the things you thought you needed were really just noise. You didn't need more income, you needed more intention. You didn't need more to-do lists. You needed fewer distractions. You didn't need to impress the world. You needed to reconnect with yourself. And as the noise fades, clarity returns. Clarity to say, I don't need to play this game anymore. Clarity to recognize that simple is not weak. Simple is sacred. Clarity to know that peace doesn't come from acquisition. It comes from alignment. And once you've tasted that peace, it ruins everything that isn't it. Because now you've seen what it's like to breathe easy, to move slow, to feel steady, to walk into a store and not buy anything, not because you can't, but because you don't need to. That's not restraint. That's real power. The kind of power that doesn't control others, but controls yourself. The kind of power that doesn't depend on the market, the job, or the applause. The kind that wakes up every morning and says, I already have what I need, now I just protect it. What if the richest version of you isn't the one who earned the most, but the one who needed the least? What if your freedom doesn't come from accumulation, but from the decision to stop needing so much to feel okay? Because let's be honest, most of us were never taught how to feel safe without a safety net made of stuff. We were taught that comfort lives in the upgrade, that identity lives in the title, that worth lives in the weight of other people's approval. But what if the real breakthrough happens not when you get more, but when you realize you're already enough? What if real wealth isn't in what you add, but in what you're brave enough to subtract the debt that comes from comparison? Subtract the stress that comes from proving. Subtract the expectations that were never yours to carry. And suddenly, what's left isn't lack, it's lightness. You begin to live in a body that doesn't feel constantly tight. You speak with a voice that doesn't tremble from insecurity. You move through your day with a quiet assurance. I'm not running anymore. I'm rooted. That's the moment your relationship with money changes forever. Because now, money becomes what it was always meant to be, a tool, a servant, not a master. You no longer need to impress people who are too distracted to notice. You no longer need to buy things to feel seen. You no longer need to chase milestones that only leave you more anxious. Now you spend with intention. Now you save with vision. Now you invest, not just financially, but emotionally into what lasts. Because that's the other lie, that money is just numbers. But it's not. Money is memory, it's emotion. It's every late bill your parents stressed over. It's every time you were told we can't afford that. It's every time you felt like your worth was tied to what you had or didn't have. So healing your finances, It's not just about spreadsheets. It's about stories. It's about rewriting the ones you've been living in. You're not broken. You're becoming aware. You're beginning again with eyes open and heart aligned. And this time, you're not building a life for applause. You're building one for peace. You don't need to chase legacy. You build it in silence, one aligned choice at a time, not with fanfare, not with flash, but in the stillness of saying this is enough. Legacy is in how you spend your time when no one is watching, in the quiet dinners where your presence is the gift, in the mornings where you wake up without dread, in the nights where your heart isn't racing over bills or burdens. You may never be the richest person in the room, but you can be the calmest, the clearest, the most grounded. And that right there is priceless. Because while others are chasing image, you're living with intention. While others trade time for things, you trade time for truth. While others build towers for admiration, you're building roots for peace. And when storms come, and they always come, you won't panic. You'll be prepared, because your worth was never tied to what can be taken. It was always built on what you chose to keep. You kept your clarity, you kept your boundaries, you kept your values, you kept your peace. And in the end, that's what real wealth is. Not the cars, not the accolades, not the mansion or the market returns, but the deep, unwavering knowing that your life belongs to you. That you didn't sell yourself to status, that you didn't silence yourself for approval, that you didn't trade your freedom for performance. You lived intentionally, wisely, powerfully. So let the world keep shouting. Let it chase. Let it race. Let it compare. You'll walk slowly, breathe deeply, spend wisely, rest fully, because you already have what they're still trying to buy, a life that feels like yours. And when you find that, you don't need to speak loudly about your success. You live it quietly, peacefully, unapologetically. You own your time. You own your choices. You own your soul. And that is true wealth.